وتعليقا على هذا التحقيق الخاص لسكاي نيوز عربية، معنا من واشنطن زميل أول في مركز السياسة الأمنية ديفيد ريابوي. سيد ديفيد، أهلا بك معنا في غرفة الأخبار من سكاي نيوز عربية. يعني حقيقة سيد ريابوي، في مطلع العام الماضي كانت قد أعلنت وزارة الخارجية الأمريكية إنها عم تمتلك أدلة على استخدام الجيش السوداني لهذه الأسلحة الكيميائية، وفرضت وقتها عقوبات على قائد الجيش الفريق أول عبد الفتاح البرهان. من منظورك كخبير في الأمن القومي، كيف تقيمون رد فعل الإدارة الأمريكية؟ وهل ترى دكتور أنه مستوى العقوبات والإجراءات المتخذة يتناسب مع خطورة جريمة استخدام هذه الأسلحة المحظورة دولياً؟
Right. Thank you for having me on. I think it was a good first step. It was obviously correct to acknowledge that that the Sudanese armed forces have used terrible industrial chemical weapons against civilian populations over there in 2024. So that was a very big step, and it was significant. But I don't think necessarily that targeted sanctions are enough. No, I think the United States should do more, especially on the sanction side.
خليني أسألك عن المزيد اللي تقصده هنا سيد ديفيد. صحيح أنه الإدارة الأمريكية كانت قد دعت الجيش السوداني للاعتراف باستخدام السلاح الكيميائي، يعني هل تعتقد أنه هذا النهج الدبلوماسي كاف بمثل هذه القضايا؟ ما الذي قصدته عندما قلت أنه يجب اتخاذ لربما قرارات أشد فاعلية؟
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, a military junta is not going to wake up one day and use chemical weapons on a civilian population and say, "Hey, we admit we did it." I mean, as we all know, this is a very bad situation. The Sudan had a wonderful opportunity in 2019, 2020 to go in a much more positive direction. But the old Bashir regime reasserted itself and launched a coup. And basically here we are. And I think it's good that the U.S. State Department under the Trump administration, under Marco Rubio, recognizes that this Islamist infiltrated regime is trouble, and they're a malign force in Sudan, and a malign force in the region, and a kind of giant. Now when we start discussing the use of chemical weapons and chlorine gas and things like that, it starts to be a more than just a Sudan problem, and frankly more than just a regional Africa problem. I think it behooves the United States and the State Department to really get serious, to sanction more elements of the regime, and frankly to put pressure on some of the countries like Egypt and Turkey and Saudi Arabia, and even some non-state actors like the Houthis, and folks who are propping up the armed forces this way. Because at the end of the day, I think the U.S. recognizes that this particular military junta is not in the interests of the people of Sudan, and it's certainly not in the interests of the people of the United States.
أشرت سيد ديفيد إلى عدد من الخيارات لربما أمام الولايات المتحدة في ظل هذا الرفض، أو إمكانية توجه الجانب الأمريكي باتجاه هذه النقاط اللي أشرت إليها. لكن هل يمكن برأيك أن نشهد تحركا أمريكيا فرديا، أو لربما عبر مجلس الأمن أو آليات دولية أخرى؟ نحن نعرف تماما سيد ديفيد بأنه الجيش السوداني أعلن مرارا رفضه استقبال أي لجنة تحقيق دولية.
Right. Yeah, look, I mean, my personal opinion is that the United Nations and the International Criminal Court and many of these, transnational bodies are completely useless and always have been. They're a plaything of whatever bloc of countries decides to use them offensively as a weapon. So I don't think at the end of the day there's going to be much relief coming from there as a practical matter. I think it's up to states, to superpowers like the United States, to really come down and say, okay, we're going to put some teeth behind this particular policy. We're going to put our foot down and say this is what our policy is in Sudan. As far as the ICC goes, or the UN, or the Security Council, or whatever transnational organizations, I mean, they are useful in the sense that they provide a forum for where evidence can be put forward. So to that extent, I think it's a good avenue, and at the end of the day, if they're not going to admit investigators, and they're going to deny any wrongdoing and any involvement, though we all know that that this was a thing that occurred. I mean, at the end of the day, there's what are you going to do about this if they don't let in investigators, if they don't if they don't allow real evidence to be put forward? I mean, the only thing you can do is put forward as much as you possibly can, and to say, okay, we are now going to take this strongly into account when we come up with a Sudan policy. And that's for the United States to do. And frankly, the United States should start pressuring allies and other people. The U.S. is not the only game in town. There are many countries that are, that are not necessarily involved in Sudan that could be. For example, more countries in Europe, and say, hey, put pressure on this junta, put pressure on these specific people, and we can begin there and create some real penalties for individuals, because at the end of the day, I think that could solve things. It solved things in many other conflicts. When you make life very difficult for oligarchs in Russia, or the families of IRGC members from Iran, that is the kind of thing that really does have an effect. So I think the U.S. should be doing that today, immediately.
المشكلة ديفيد بأنه بالانتظار رقعة هذا الخطر يتوسع. يعني توجد تقارير سودانية تتحدث عن أنه استخدام هذه الأسلحة الكيميائية لم يقتصر على الجيش، بل شمل أيضا ميليشيات مسلحة، شمل كتائب إسلامية. كيف تنظر إلى خطورة انتقال أو انتشار هذا النوع من السلاح خارج إطار الجيوش النظامية، وشو انعكاس ذلك على أمن السودان ودول الإقليم؟ شرحت لي بأنه هذا الخطر انتشر إلى دول أخرى.
Right. Well, this is it's a very common excuse that is leaned on by a lot of regimes, or juntas, or bad actors everywhere in the world, which is they say, oh no, it was this little militia that we have no control over. Yasser Arafat was the master of doing this for many, many decades. Where he would have terrorism happening within his organization that he could very obviously distance himself from when it came to the public. So that's something that people will say. That's something that people will always say. And frankly, it's up to competent and serious intelligence agencies to be able to figure out what's true about this or not. Because frankly, having these debates, in the public, and sort of uh, walking into an information war being pushed by the Qataris and the Turks and others, and sort of fighting it out there based on no evidence. I think that's a loser. I think that's exactly what they want to do. So they will go and they will muddy the waters in public. But at the end of the day, we should be able to rely on. Hopefully, we should be able to rely on the assessments of legitimate intelligence agencies who can come in and say, "Hey, this is who was responsible to a great degree of certainty."
وفي حال ثبوت استخدام هذه الأسلحة الكيميائية بشكل قاطع ديفيد، هل تعتقد أن الولايات المتحدة قد تتجه أو قد تدفع باتجاه تصنيف جهات سودانية كمنظمات منتهكة للقانون الدولي أو يمكن ككيانات إرهابية إذا ثبت تورط ميليشيات أيديولوجية أيضاً؟
Oh, that's a no-brainer at all. I mean, I would do that today, regardless. I think there's more than enough evidence to do exactly that. In the last few months, you've had the Trump administration very wisely designate some branches of the Muslim Brotherhood um, as terrorist organizations, and I think there's an increasing willingness in the United States, in this administration especially, to understand that it's not such a sharp, hard line between violent Islamists and nonviolent Islamists. I mean, I think a lot of people are beginning to see in Washington that the line is really between violent Islamists and pre-violent Islamists, and and in that way, they should be able to kind of designate more freely.
شكرا ديفيد، شكرا على هذه المداخلة من واشنطن، زميل أول في مركز السياسة الأمنية ديفيد ريابوي.